Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Let the record indicate it is 6 p.m. and the Finance Committee is called to order. First order of business is PCR 113-19, a resolution regarding a 5-year plan. I need to have a motion to move it to the floor for discussion.
Motion moved to the floor for discussion.
Seconded.
We have a motion to move to the floor for discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Need a motion to close the Finance Committee meeting at 6:01. Finance is closed at 6:01.
Council will come to order, and the clerk will call the roll. Here.
Mr. Corley? Mr. Howe? Here. Mr. Ladson? Here. Mr. McAllister? Here. Mr. Narrenroy?
Yeah.
Mr. Ricks?
Here.
Mr. Sinapi? Here. Ms. Travis?
Here.
If Councilman Ricks could lead us in the salute to the flag.
Oh, say, can
what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
If the record could reflect that Councilman Corley is in attendance. The first item on the agenda is a public hearing on the presentation on a 5-year financial plan projection and report by Markham LLP. Could I have a motion to open the public hearing? Seconded by Councilwoman Travis, Councilman McAllister. Okay, before we start, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming here this evening. As you will recall, this item was on the council agenda, and members of the city council had suggested, and members of the public, that we have a special council meeting. So as not to delay what we do in the committee. So we're here tonight. Markham is here. It's the first time that we've had a presentation that I've been on the council regarding a 5-year plan. I think the last time that a 5-year plan was done was in 2013. This is Markham's projections of what it could look like. This is not any administration's projections as to what it could look like. And I'll let Kyle O'Connor from Markham open his presentation, and I'll move to the audience so I could see too. I just wanted to say that one of the key aspects of a 5-year plan, what we're talking about are what the costs are in the future. And I think Kyle's going to go over his assumptions with everyone, but I like to refer to this as the vanilla plan. This doesn't have any increases for buildings, any increases for new trucks, any increases for bonding for schools. It's just if we continue forward. I think it's an important barometer, if you will, as to what we do in the future when we take votes on different issues. And I think it will give us a good opportunity to look at what our priorities are. With that said, does anybody have any statements or anything they want to make before we start? If not, if you could just introduce yourself for the record, and then I'll move around so I can see you also.
Good evening, everybody. Hello. Oh, great. Good evening, everybody. My name is Kyle Connors. I'm with Markham LLP. If you want a copy of the slides that we're going to go through, there's packets down here. It might be a little bit easier to follow along, especially as we get into the financial aspects of the 5-year plan. So the purpose of this evening is to help the City Council and the citizens understand and analyze the city's fiscal health. And we're going to do this 2 ways. We're going to consider the ramifications of long-term effects on the city, and we're also going to look at the short-term. And I think it's important that we view this 2 ways. I want to have everyone look at our 5-year forecast that we've put together and go over the assumptions and give an understanding of where our figures come from. And subsequent to that, I want to go through the last 5 years and kind of show you how Warwick got to the position that it's in these past 5 years. So we're going to look at long-term, short-term, and then we're going to look to the future and then look to see how we got there. So when we put our 5-year forecast together, there's some important assumptions that we made. And the first relates to salaries where we're anticipating a 2.75% salary increase across the board. So that includes municipal, police, fire, school as well. So 2.75 in salary increases, 2% in commodities, 2.5% in services, 7.27% increase in healthcare costs. And we got that by looking at the last 5 years dating back to 2014. On average, healthcare for the city of Warwick has increased at 7.27%. I know when the actuary was here a couple weeks ago, he gave you a range of 8 trending down to 5. But if we look just at the last 5 years, not necessarily into the future, we landed at 7.25. And your pension increases are taken from the actuarial evaluations that we received from your actuaries. It's also important to note that we did increase the asphalt line, which was decreased in the 2020 budget. It was decreased to 1.5 from 4.5. We saw it probably more reasonable that costs would come in at 2.5 million as opposed to the 1.5 that's currently in the 2020 budget. 2 other assumptions that are very important is that, as Councilman Marola said, we're not adding any new programs or services to the city that weren't already in the 2020 budget. So there's no new projects, no new capital bonds or anything. But even more importantly, it assumes that there are no cuts being made to the services that are already in the 2020 budget. A lot of times, municipality may be facing a deficit, and they may say, okay, this year we're not going to spend $2.5 million in asphalt and paving. We're going to decrease that. Well, we're not going to, I know there was a lot of talk about school sports in Warwick, and that was almost an issue where those weren't funded. So the programs that are in the 2020 budget, we're assuming those are going to continue moving forward. So if we do that and we make those assumptions, I apologize if that's a little hard to read. There are physical copies if you need it. What we end up with is operating expenditures in 2021 of $329 million. The city has a capital budget for the city and for the school, which you can see right below that. And then we took our lease figures and our bond figures out of the June 30, 2018 financial statements. So these lease increases and the $40 million school bond issuance occurred after June 30, 2018. So it's important that we recognize those costs as well. What that leads us to is an increase over 2020 of about $10.7 million, with a maximum tax increase of about $8.9 million and an increase in licenses and fees of about $579,000. That gives us revenue of about $9.4 million or so. But what's important to note is that the city's 2020 budget had a $3.5 million structural deficit, which means when the budget was put together, expenditures were higher than the revenues by $3.5 million, anticipating that you would be using some of your rainy day fund to cover that. That $3.5 million is unsustainable over the course of, 5-10 years. You can't keep spending $3.5 million every year, or else you run out of money. So we're anticipating that you're going to need to raise an additional $3.5 million to cover the structural deficit. With those assumptions being made, we are forecasting a gap in 2021 of just under $4.8 million. And that represents 1.5% of your entire budget. This also only factors in your payment that you've been making for your OPEB on an annual basis, which is pay as you go, of about $12 million. If we were to include the full ARC as reported by the actuary that you had in last week, your forecasted gap would be about $28 million. You're putting 12 in now. The actuary said in order to fund it over the course of 30 years, you should be putting in 35. So at the rate things are going, about 4.8. If you were to pay the full OPEB ARC, it would be about $28 million just for fiscal 21. If we continue this trend over the course of 5 years, 2021 through 2025, what we have anticipated is a forecasted gap in total of about $12.8 million. And that's only if you're paying your OPEB pay-as-you-go. It's not factoring in the ARC. If we did factor in the ARC, it would be about $127.8 million worth of gap. So I know that there will be a lot of questions on this, which we will be happy to answer to the best of our ability for you. But this is what we're anticipating for the next 5 years moving forward, provided that program services aren't taken out of the budget. Now, I know that that can be kind of challenging to understand if you're someone who's not working in municipal auditing, if you're not looking at these financial statements, which are 200 pages long, and trying to understand what they mean. So what we're going to do is kind of give you an overlay of some of the key metrics that we use to measure municipalities when we give our grading system. And while we do that, I want to try to equate it to a household with a $75,000 annual income. You've got a car loan of maybe 15 grand, so you own some assets, maybe you own a home, and your credit card debt is roughly $240,000. That's sort of the best way for a citizen to kind of get an idea of how the city is working at the moment. So if you're a family of four living off of income of $75,000, your long-term focus may be saving money for your children to go to college. You may be saving for retirement or maintaining the home that you live in. And that's a long-term focus. For a municipality, a long-term focus is focusing on your infrastructure, which is making sure you have proper assets, buildings, schools, trucks, vehicles, making sure that they're in good shape. A short-term focus for a family would be paying your monthly mortgage, feeding your family, the things that are immediate. And when we look at the short-term focus for a municipality, we're not really looking at infrastructure or general obligation debt or OPEB or pension. We're mostly focusing on cash on hand and your ability to pay your bills, to pay salaries over the course of the next year, a short-term look. So over the course of the past 5 years, the city their liabilities have increased over their assets all 5 years. So basically you've run a deficit from a long-term perspective for the last 5 years. What does that mean for a family of four? That means at the end of every year for the last 5 years, your credit card debt is higher than it has been the year before. So if we were to look at this and measure it, going back to 2014, you can see that from 2014 to 2018, your long-term liabilities have exceeded your long-term assets. 17 million in 2014. Your debt increased. 12 million in 2015. 43 million in 2016. All the way up to last year's financial statements, where you'd see your long-term net position decreased by $22.8 million. So if we were to equate that to the credit card scenario, every year you've spent an additional $17,000, an additional $12,000, an additional $43,000, and you keep seeing the principal rise on your credit card balance all the way up to $240,000 at present. And the challenge with that is you've got $20,000 in the bank, which is great because you have some savings, but it's significantly less than what you have on your credit card. And a good portion of what makes up that debt for the city is the net pension liability and the net OPEB liability. So if we were to look at dating back to 2014, it looks like your debt exceeds your assets by about $65 million, 64.8. But what's important to note is that in 2015, your pension liability, which had always existed in the notes to your financial statements, was actually put on the balance sheet of your financial statements. In 2017, the same thing occurred for your retiree health care plan, which again was in the notes to the financial statements, but it hadn't been put on the balance sheet yet. So in 2017, it hit the balance sheet. And you can see the significant rise between 2014 and 2015 for your net pension liability in your overall debt. And the same for pension in retiree health care in 2017. The best way I can explain that to you is that you're going to a bank and you're trying to take out a loan, and they ask what credit cards you have, and you give them your credit cards, your credit card debt. Well, in 2015 and in 2017, you finally showed the bank old credit cards. You knew you had them, but you've never reported them on your balance sheet. And so that's why there's such a significant increase. As it relates to your enterprise funds, specifically your water and your sewer fund, these have historically raised enough fees to cover their costs. So that means your water bill has been relatively consistent over the past 5 years. However, the infrastructure that gets the water to you needs significant repairs, and your rate is going to increase. My understanding is that the water director noted that they need about $100 million in infrastructure in order to fix the current problem. So you're going to feel that burden on your utility rates. It's also important to note that if you were to look in the financial statements, the water fund has a due to what I believe to be the general fund of about $7.2 million. And if you look at the water fund also, it has a negative net position. So basically, if the general fund were to say, we need that $7.2 million, the water fund wouldn't be able to give it to them. And that's going to be important to note when we go and look at our a rainy day fund in a few moments here. So if we look at the short-term focus, which is your general fund and the undesignated fund balance, this is the amount of money that you've got in the bank in order to cover your mortgage costs and in order to cover the interest on your credit card. So if you've got $20,000 in the bank, you're using that to cover your mortgage, you're using it to cover your interest, but at the same time, you're still using that credit card on the side. So the principal balance on the credit card is getting higher and higher, which means your principal payments are going to increase, your interest payments are going to increase, and eventually you're going to get to a point where the $20,000 you have in the bank isn't going to be able to cover the cost of the principal and the interest on the credit card. So if we go to look at your short-term, the city's short-term savings, you've got in June 30th, 2018, you've got $22.6 million worth of undesignated fund balance. And why I think it's important to note that the water fund owes the general fund $7.2 million, potentially. I'm not your auditors, so I haven't had an opportunity to I've only had an opportunity to read the financial statements, but it appears that that's the case. Your undesignated fund balance could potentially be overstated by about $7.2 million in fund balance that should be considered non-spendable. So that's something you may want to ask your audit firm about. But with $22.6 million in fund balance, that's roughly 8.6% of your general fund's fund expenditures. So on a ratio that we typically see between 8 and 16%, the city is on the lower end of that. What does that mean? That means if you're a family living off an income, if you lost your job, you'd have enough money in the savings banks to cover your costs for about 2 months worth of mortgage and principal and interest. As we look towards your infrastructure, your governmental infrastructure, which excludes your water and your sewer, stands at about $400 million, of which $300 million is currently depreciated. That means on average, your capital assets have reached 75% of their useful lives. That's your schools, that's your municipal buildings, trucks, equipment. Those all fall under your capital assets. 75% is a pretty significant number. So we assess that as the range of yellow, where you're trending toward fully depreciated assets. What does that mean to a family? Well, that means your roof is 20 years old, your boiler's 30 years old, your car has 175,000 miles, and your furnace needs to be replaced. You keep saying every year that you're going to start saving for it next year, but you never do. And this ties directly into your general obligation debt. So there's two types of debt. You've got your general obligation debt, which you can use to cover the cost of infrastructure, and you've got your credit card debt, which is basically your pension and your OPEB debt. Well, when we look at your debt service as a percentage of your total general fund expenditures, it's pretty low. That means you have the capacity to go out and probably take out significant amount of general obligation bonds in order to fix the roof, in order to fix the boiler, in order to to fix or to buy a new car. So you have the capacity to take on new debt. And we've seen it with the rating agencies. They came out and said you had a good rating. They'd be more than happy to lend the city money. But if you look at this from the perspective of a family, you've got $240,000 worth of credit card debt, and the bank is happy to give you a home equity line that's going to cover $500,000. So you can do all those things. You can fix all of those problems that you want to. But at the end, your income isn't going to change. Your principal and your interest payments on the home equity line are going to increase, and you're still going to have your $240,000 in credit card debt. So while they're letting you have the money, at some point you do have to pay it back. So I want to get into the pension and the OPEB plans a little bit here. Those are the two significant liabilities that are driving your credit card debt, so to speak. So your pension plans, you've got 6 pension plans, 4 of which are funded at better than 75%, but when you combine them all, they're funded at 54%, leaving you with a net pension liability of $453 million. And you're anticipating that the assets you have in those plans, which are significant, are going to work at 6.9% over the course of the next 20 years. So that's a relatively significant number. I think it's a tick under what the state uses at 7%. So we're assuming a good economy here. Overall, 54% of your pension plans funded is well below what the state says is a well-funded plan at 80%. But it's not terrible until you combine it with your OPEB plan, which currently has no assets associated with it. As I noted at the beginning of the presentation, your city and your school plans are being funded on pay-as-you-go. So you're not building up any assets to cover any future liabilities. Your expenditures, as it relates to OPEB, are approximately $12 million a year at the pay-as-you-go. And the actuary said that you need to put in about $34 to $35 million a year over the next 30 years in order to fully fund your plan. Basically what that means for the average family is that at the rate you're currently spending, your interest payments are going up 7% per year, and you're never reducing your principal on your credit card. And as you can see here, there are two separate OPEB plans, one for the city and one for the school. The city's OPEB liability sits at $352 million, and the school's liability sits at $53 million, neither of which have any assets to support them in the future. You can see the school is significantly lower than the city's liability, and that's because individuals who are on that plan come off that plan at 65 and are on Medicare, whereas the city offers lifetime health insurance for retirees. So just getting back to our initial forecast, obviously these are inherently subjective and based off of the hypothetical assumptions that I had laid out in the beginning of the presentation. Your actual results will differ, and they could differ substantially based on whether programs are cut, based on the economy and what happens moving forward. And each budget preparation cycle is different. If you were to look back to 2018, the city was anticipating using $4 million worth of surplus. In 2019, they were anticipating using 3.8, and in 20, they were anticipating using 3.5. So each budget is different. We are just going off of the most recent information that we have available. So I guess we'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Kyle. I also know, I was going to ask about the school department. I think when we talked to them about giving them additional money in July, they said they were going to do a 5-year plan and give that 5-year plan to us. Do you know where they're at that point on their 5-year plan and their projections?
I've only seen agendas discussing it. I haven't actually seen a 5-year plan from the school.
Okay. Councilman Sinapi, I know you sit on one of those committees. Is that they're looking at, do you know when they're looking at completing their 5-year forecast?
I know it's actively being worked on. We actually have a meeting on it tomorrow. If I recall, and I might be off, I know the chair's here, the plan was to have it before December, if not by November, one of the two.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you a question about page 3.
Sure.
Your assumptions. You're assuming a salary increase at 2.75% across the board. How did you reach that number?
Based on historical trends.
Historical trend, okay. And the same is true with commodities, electricity, gas,
Supplies.
fuel, supplies.
Correct.
And that's really the cost of inflation.
Correct.
And then a 2.5% increase in services. How'd you get that number, and what's that for?
Yeah, all three of those numbers, I mean, you could increase them or decrease them however you wanted. That's just what we felt comfortable based off of historical data from the city's financial statements.
And obviously, if you move those numbers up or down, it changes the forecast of what you'd
Absolutely.
have.
Yep.
Also, 7.27% increase in healthcare. How did you get those numbers? How did you get that percentage?
We took the increases dating back to 2014, and the average increase has been 7.27% over that period of time.
So I know, for example, the school department came and testified a few months ago and said they were looking for this year a 14% increase.
Yep.
But you didn't select a number like that. You went back and you averaged what everybody did over the last 5 years.
That's correct.
Okay. And the pension increases, did you make Did you make those up, or how did you get those numbers?
Those came directly from the actuarial valuations. You have an actuary who gives you a pension valuation every single year.
Those were the actuaries that came before us.
That's correct. Yep.
Not too long ago. I also wanted to talk to you about short-term versus long-term, because I think there's some confusion that goes on there. We've been talking about this problem, and I know that you had pointed out in particular, I forget what slide it was, that some of these costs were, for the first time, put on, I think it was slide 11, were first put on our balance sheet a few years back, even though there was an asterisk there. And that has to do with the government accounting board's recommendations as to how to...
More requirements than recommendations. They were always required to be disclosed in the notes to the financial statements, and what you would have seen historically on your balance sheet, for example, would be a net pension obligation, which is the amount that you've underfunded your ARC over the course of the life of your pension plan. The pension obligation and the OPEB obligation were significantly lower than what the true liability is, which is what you're seeing now in your financial statements.
So, short term, in July, this council will look at a budget. Are you saying we're not going to be able to pay our bills next year?
No, I think the short-term focus is that you'll be able to, pay your bills moving forward. How long that continues based on the rise in your healthcare costs and whether or not you choose to invest in infrastructure to fix your buildings will determine, when it gets to a point where you may not be able to. And there's too many factors in the future to determine, exactly when that year will be.
So the actuaries came before us a few weeks ago, and they told us that the plan that we have cannot be sustained. Eventually, we won't be able to pay these bills. The question I think everybody always asks is when? When is that going to hit? And I think the point, and I called it a vanilla presentation, but the point is that this council, the administration, the school department has to make choices because there's only so much revenue that you can bring in. So those choices mean cuts in services or programs or designs. And you might not see those to the average taxpayer or council person until something happens. So until a sewer line collapses, until, as Dan has come before us, a water main breaks, and you're struggling to pay that bill or to fix that infrastructure because we haven't been making the investments. I understand that the sewer and water may not be the best examples because they're quote-unquote self-sustaining because they bring in their own revenue, but they're not being repaired, and we guarantee those bonds, if you will, for those entities. And as ratepayers, we all pay for those services, whether they're in the form of taxes or they're not. At the end of the day, I think I've asked you this before, you're looking at, if you keep everything the same for next year, about how much increase? If you kept everything the same, did you say 10 or 11 million? In other words...
Oh, yes, yep. Sorry, I misunderstood
Yep.
your question. Yeah, roughly $10.7 million worth of increased expenditures.
and a maximum tax increase is around 8.2, 8.3. So the point is that we can do it. It's just we have to choose where we're going to make cuts or not provide money in a certain line item. I know recently there's been a little bit of confusion with this bond rating and how bonding companies determine whether you can take out debt or not, take out more loans, more bonds. And they said which is excellent, we have a AA bond rating. When I talked to the actuaries about it, I think you touched on it briefly tonight, which is if we do go out to bonding and how they determine that it's a AA bond rating is that they assume, and there was an asterisk in our actuarial reports, they assume that we're making the payments not only for pensions but for health care. And as you know, we're pay as you go. We're not paying the annual required contribution. If they were asked to assume that we weren't making those payments on those bonds, I would venture to guess that, and when I say the bonds, I meant to say the healthcare OPEB costs. I would venture to guess that the rating for every city and town in the United States, not just Warwick, would change. This is a problem that's not unique to Warwick. I think back on the fiscal crisis that happened in 2009 where the subprime mortgage collapse and people were evaluating bonds and debts for mortgages, and they were told that they were Class A, and they weren't. I get nervous when I see what happens here, but also probably what's happening in every other city and town around the United States as far as how they're calculating, the value of the ability to pay back. In other words, they don't tell us that we can pay. They tell us what we need to pay, not whether we can afford to pay it. And obviously we're not paying those debts, which is very concerning to me also. At the end of the day, you analogized to a household and to income. Is that the best analogy that you could come up with? Because we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. And you're talking about credit card debt that's unsecured. At some point in time, you pay that credit card debt if you're only paying interest only. And you would think that when you pay interest only on a credit card debt, that the principal on that credit card doesn't go up. But in our case, on the city side, the principal does go up because for the first time in the history of the city of Warwick, we have more retirees than we have active employees. So when the employees go on to that payroll system, even though we're making the interest-only payments for health care, that debt continues to grow, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And there are some assumptions, obviously, that the actuaries made with regard to how much health care is going to go up and how much we're going to contribute. And those numbers are not factored in. Those ARC payments are completely not factored in to your analysis because we're not making the ARC payments, correct?
Yep, correct. 12 million, whereas the ARC would be about 35.
So when you say we might need 10 or 11 and we could maybe, we'll do next year, we might cut something, that is also recognizing that we're on pay-as-you-go with regard to healthcare, and that we're not making any of the payments that we should be making for healthcare.
Correct. That's why we've got two separate lines, one for a forecasted gap based on max tax increases in our anticipated expenditures, and a second line below it that shows you that same forecast if you were to be making your OPEB ARC payment.
So my issue with tonight, anyway, is we're not voting on anything tonight. This is just informational. People can ask questions. At the end of the day, that debt needs to be paid. And I don't know if people in the public, in collective bargaining units, in government, agree on where we are. Because we get a lot of mixed messages. If we don't agree on numbers, because numbers don't lie, and the actuaries, they give the reports every year on behalf of the administration. They don't give it on behalf of the council. If we don't know where we are, we can't agree on what we need to do to get to the next step to make sure that these unsustainable debts don't get us to the point where you can't pay them anymore. And that's the most disconcerting aspect of the presentation to me tonight is, do people believe where we are? Because if we don't believe where we are, then we can't fix it. And I hope the council appreciated the presentation. I know Councilman Ricks has a question.
At the assumption, excuse me, as I look at the assumptions, I see a number of very expensive items that the city simply doesn't have control over. While we may, in the long term, have some control over some of our health care or health insurance costs, that 7.27% increase, and correct me if I'm wrong, assuming that Warwick has generally the same health care insurance coverage for its employees these last 5 years, and not a massive swing in the number of employees, that 7.27% generally reflects health care inflation?
Correct, based off of, right.
Yeah.
It's the healthcare trend rate that your actuary described a couple weeks ago.
Thank you. And so while, theoretically we can make changes to plans in future years through the collective bargaining process, the healthcare inflation, our assumption is that just as it didn't go away in the last 5 years, it's not going to go away in the next 5 years either.
Likely not.
And obviously the city has little control over the cost of commodities, might be more, might be less. Similarly, relatively little control over the cost of services. So, and similarly, the pensions. But one item when for this exercise of looking 5 years down the road and deciding on, okay, how are we going to figure out how to fund our priorities, would be contractual and otherwise outside of the collective bargaining units for management or other types of employees, the salary increases. And because that is such a large part of the budget, I'd be interested in knowing what would these numbers look like. I'm taking a look at page 5, where just looking at those top line numbers of the operating expenditures, it appears that our projection is showing roughly 3 to 4% increases, with the 4% being a maximum tax increase. And part of that is, well, that's that list of the 5 assumptions, one of them being a 2.75% salary increase across the board. And I'm curious, how would those top line numbers be affected if instead of 2.75%, it was, well, it doesn't do me much good to just throw out random numbers, but exactly how much of those overall increases are affected by the 2.75%? Say, what would 1.75% or 2.25% look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't have that information readily available in front of me, but I can provide the council with the ability to toggle through the assumptions, change them based on maybe what you think the assumption should be based different than what we think, and then that will provide you with your answer.
Thank you. And just to be clear, I'm certainly not making any sort of suggestion that the current 2.75% salary increases that are in the collective bargaining agreements should be different from what they are, but simply to inform our discussion about these long-term costs, especially going down the road after the conclusion of the current contracts, as to how we can afford our priorities or otherwise try to avoid onerous tax increases that are either maximum tax increases or close to it. Thank you.
Councilman Corley.
Good evening. The GASB numbers, I understand it's the government accounting. I don't know what the S
Standards Board. It's the Governmental Accounting Standards Board.
Government Accounting Standard Board. And that board is not made of governmental figures, right?
I mean, I don't believe the Secretary of State sits on it, but I believe it's its own organization.
It is a group of accountants that come up with the figures that they need in order to deal with Wall Street pertaining to bonding. Is that a basic reason for their existence?
One of many.
They are not a board that tells municipalities how to govern cities and towns or states, right?
Certainly not.
And it's not a government agency, right?
I don't believe so. I believe that their focus is more on the presentation of your financial statements than it is how you run your municipality.
But the point of having the standards that they set are to be used when municipal bonding is determined and for funding those types of activities?
To an extent, I suppose. I think their focus is more on like I said, on the presentation of, for example, the pension and the OPEB liabilities that are shown in your financial statements, how those are generated.
Well, who are they showing them to?
So in order for an audit firm to issue your financial statements with a clean opinion, that means you don't have a qualified opinion in your report letter. You have to present the financial statements in accordance with GASB standards. So that's what your audit firm was following.
I have a question concerning the page 17 of your presentation, where you talk about the state says that a well-funded plan is 80% and above. Are you talking about the state of Rhode Island?
That's correct.
How many of the 39 municipalities meet that standard?
How many what?
There's 39 cities and towns in
Yep.
Rhode Island.
How many of them meet the 80% standard?
Yes, do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head.
When we had first received the report relating to OPEB, the first term I was here, I was surprised at the numbers that were forecasted. And I went to the general treasurer, and I could not understand why the general treasurer had issued a report that had Warwick in the top 20% of cities and towns in Rhode Island financially. Can you explain how, with these numbers, a statement like that would be possible?
I don't know the context of the statement, or I don't know what they were comparing it to. So
Okay, well, how do we compare with the other cities and towns?
I've only have the information in front of me for Warwick. But I don't know that a lot of other municipalities have.
I'm sorry, I did not hear you.
I don't know that a lot of other municipalities in the state of Rhode Island have $890 or $850 million worth of OPEB and pension liability.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that a lot of other municipalities in Rhode Island have $850 million worth of pension and OPEB liability on their books.
You don't know what any of the other municipalities have, isn't that correct?
Off the top of my head,
Yeah.
I do not.
No, well, I understand, and that was not the purpose for you coming here, and I'm not saying that you should have that information. That is not...
I can certainly find it for you, though, at a later date.
I lost my train of thought. I had another question, but it's escaped me. If it comes back, I'll raise my hand again. Thanks.
Councilman McAllister.
Good evening. Good evening, Kyle. Thanks for coming here tonight. I know we've met a couple of times to go over this in the last few months, but I just want to ask some framing questions first. When you're going over this, you said in earlier presentations that this is not a roadmap. This is projections on the assumptions that you have at the time of putting this together.
That's correct.
And a number of different things can change this overnight.
Absolutely.
One of the things that's not unique to Warwick now, if we talked about these governmental standards, now this number has always been there, as we know, but now we have to show on our balance sheet the net pension liabilities and the retirement health care costs on the balance sheets. But that's not just the city of Warwick. That is the across-the-board standard now.
Across the whole United States. Yep, that's correct.
So I know obviously you can't speak for the entire United States, each city and town, but wouldn't the majority, now that we have to show this number, everyone's is going up?
Absolutely.
A large number?
Yep,
So Warwick is not unique in that.
absolutely correct.
Also, on the pay-as-you-go that the city of Warwick does, we had the actuary came here a couple weeks ago. He was from New York, and he mentioned the state of New York has a state law that you're not even allowed to prepay the OPEB.
That was the first time I'd heard that.
Yeah, so is Warwick the only, so I would think, again, if that holds up, that every city and town in the state of New York would have these large OPEB liabilities as they're doing pay-as-you-go.
If they offer the plan.
Correct. Yeah, correct, if they offer a plan. In your knowledge, the rest of the state, is Warwick the only one who does pay-as-you-go, or are there other cities and towns to your knowledge?
The majority I've seen over the last 5 years are pay-as-you-go. It's only been until recently when the number's been put on the balance sheet where a lot of trust funds have been set up, most of which are funded somewhere between 5 and 10%.
So it's only almost recently that these trust funds have been set up, and it's going to be a huge number for everybody.
Yep.
Again, not
Definitely.
unique to the city of Warwick, across the country.
Absolutely.
This is an issue. On the assumptions that you made for our presentation this evening, as you mentioned, it is not a roadmap. Things can change. I think recently we saw some news come out of the administration that there was a surplus, a budget surplus, and after some expenses to the school department and some other things, we originally had budgeted to take out $2.4 million out of the rainy day fund, and now unaudited numbers, but the drafts that we've received, it may be closer to around $100,000. So that's a big swing right there of what is staying in the rainy day fund.
Okay.
How much in your presentation do we take out, do you project taking out of the rainy day fund each of the next 5 years?
So if we go back to our forecast here, our notion was that it wasn't sustainable to continue to take $3.5 million out of your rainy day fund every year. That would add up to $17.5 million worth of your rainy day fund through 2025. So in our projection, you're going to see that we're anticipating revenues are going to be generated or expenses will be cut in order to make up for that $3.5 million, so that you can keep your fund balance preserved at what it currently is at.
Okay, so it is used to do these projections here. You use $3.5 million coming out of the rainy day fund each year, but with cuts and what was the other thing?
So we didn't. So the 2020 budget has a structural deficit of 3.5 million, meaning the revenues are lower than the anticipated expenses by 3.5 million. As we move into 2021, we're anticipating the city is going to raise enough money or lower enough expenses in order to not take an additional 3.5 out every single year.
Okay, all right. And we spent a lot of time on the OPEB, the healthcare, because we are doing the pay-as-you-go. With the pensions here in the city of Warwick, that's more of a number that we can kind of drill down on. I believe the actuary mentioned that we have one really bad pension plan, Fire One, about 24% funded, obviously lumped in with the other ones that really brings down the overall average for the city for our pension plans. But he mentioned that there's only 7 active people still paying in that plan, and there is a long-term plan. I guess we are in year 24 of a 40-year plan, scheduled plan to pay off that. So that is being addressed at this time. That is the worst one.
The ARC is being met.
The ARC is being met.
And provided the economy does well, you're going to make interest off of your assets as well. But certainly a recession would change that. But you are meeting the ARC in order to fund it.
Mm-hmm. And we are doing ARC. We're doing projections of 6.9% return. That's a little lower than the state. Does the state, are they above 7?
Yeah, they were at 7.25, and I think either 2 years ago or a year ago they dropped down to 7%.
Okay.
And you're using 6.9%.
And if we don't hit that 6.9%, if we're lower, obviously these numbers get a lot worse. And if you do better, they get if the economy goes better and we get better returns. But we're using the 6.9%. In your opinion, is that kind of a conservative one since it's a little bit lower than what the state does?
I would say it's on par with what we see with other municipalities.
Okay. All right. All right. So with this forecast that you have here tonight, again, it is a roadmap of where we're going, but it seems like Warwick is not unique in the situations that we need to tackle. These numbers were always there. It is just now they're on the budget sheet, which is eye-popping. These are huge numbers. I know you're not here to give us recommendations on how we should address these things long terms. But overall, if you're looking at just the pensions, we can still bond. We are very low, right? I think we can still bond a number to help the situation if we wanted to bond different things. We still have some flexibility on that, correct?
Correct. I mean, I'm not the bonding agency, but
Yeah.
it appears as though based on the rating you were given that you have the ability to go out for general obligation bonds.
Okay. So while this is definitely an issue that we need to address, there's also so many different assumptions that can come in. It can change overnight. Like we just found out, we thought we were going to take, $2.5 million, $2.4 million out of the rainy day fund. It may be less now. That everything changes, so we just need to stay on top of this. But this is very important to bring this forward because that number was always there. This net pension liability and the retirement health care, but now it's on the balance sheet.
Correct.
But the city of Warwick is not unique in this situation. We are going to be seeing these issues across the countries. Big and small towns are going to be addressing this, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for your time.
So you included governmental activities when you were factoring in for our total liabilities. Well, why didn't you include business activities?
Generally, those are paid off with the user fees that are brought in, charges for services that are brought in by those funds. The rate that's being set is hopefully being set at a rate that's going to cover those costs. Generally, user fees like water and sewer are self-sustainable and don't need transfers in on a year-to-year basis from the general fund, which is your governmental activities.
I ask because based on the financial report, it looks like when we factor in business activities, the deficiency drops by about 120 million. So I mean, it's still not a great number at 600 and change, but better than 730.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is money that is your net investment in capital assets, which is your money that's tied up in infrastructure, net of debt. So it's not like it's cash on hand in those funds. It's mostly investments in infrastructure that shift to lower the 730 down by 120 million.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilman Lattiser.
Mr. President, Kyle, also thank you for joining us this evening and giving us this presentation. Actually a few people have called me about this presentation, and the questions were, so, what does it mean? How does it affect us? And in the business world, we have a saying that says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And as we heard earlier, we haven't had a 5-year forecast in a very long time. So this isn't anything that's locked in stone. Just this morning, I compared it to a GPS. Someone was asking me about it. So doesn't it fluctuate? Of course it does. It's just like a GPS. You have an old GPS, it might not even show you some of the streets that exist today. You could have a brand new GPS, and it could take you across a body of water in what's called auto guidance. And if you're not paying attention, you could find yourself run aground because it tells you there's no guarantees that this auto guidance program is exact. So I think we understand that. I remember sitting in this chamber many years before I was elected to the council, going back to somewhere around 2007, 2008, of which some other folks were here at that time, and having a similar conversation about what's sustainable and what's not sustainable. And it's been said that back then we were told, here's what the reality is and here's where we're going to be in 10 years or so from now. And why aren't we gone? And I think a large part of that reason is because it wasn't that the numbers in the forecasts and the projections were far off target. I think the answer is because over the last 18 to 20 years, what we've done is we've ignored the things that need to be taken care of, because the money was flying out the door faster than it was coming in. Things like the schools, the school buildings, infrastructure, sewers, storm drains, basic equipment. We're hearing now, in the past year or so, some significant and alarming numbers about our infrastructure reaching a 75%, what's the word I'm looking for? Depreciation. So if you don't address those issues, sure, you're going to have what appears to be some additional monies, and you're going to have what it appears to be an okay business plan. For the average person, the taxpayers, the folks who pay the bills, they say, we have X amount of dollars and cents to spend. And you talked about that. And you said, if you just keep adding on to that credit card bill because you don't have the cash to take care of this or take care of that, because you have to pay the mortgage, you have to pay the insurance, you have to put food on the table, you have to buy the children clothing, but you need some of these other unexpected things that occur, such as your boiler fails, or you get a hole in your roof and your roof is leaking. And you don't have the money to do those because your other associated costs, such as the costs that we have in government, which are all the costs you spoke to, legacy costs, healthcare costs, pensions, et cetera, and the day-to-day costs of operating a business. In the real world of the taxpayer, if they continue to put money on this credit card and all they can pay is the interest, sooner or later, that day of reckoning is going to get here where they are paying so much interest on the credit card that they can't pay the mortgage. Or the transmission in the car dies and they don't have any money left. They can't borrow it because they're maxed out and they've got their credit cards with a principal balance so high because all they paid was interest, they don't have the money to buy the transmission. And they're going to be saying to themselves, how am I supposed to get to work? So I think it's very important, and Councilman Ricks touched on it earlier, I think it's very important for everyone in this city, all of the employees, all of the taxpayers, all of us here in city government, at least admit that we are not on a rosy street here. Everything isn't just hunky-dory. We have retirees now that are retiring with pensions of $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, and $9,000 a month in pensions. That's not what was going on 10 or 15 years ago. And it's not going to be what's going on in 10 or 15 years from now. Because if we don't deal with these day-to-day business issues and admit that we have a spending problem and come up with a plan to fix it on everyone's parts, then yeah, we're certainly going to have some significant issues, and eventually the day is going to come when we're not going to be able to fix it. When you think about what I just said with $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, and $9,000 a month pensions, and when you think about what was said earlier, we have more employees who are retired than are working. What does that mean to everybody in this room? What does it mean to you? What it means to me is the folks that are working every day are going to be paid more because of the escalating costs and not being able to keep up with them. If you have less money coming into your corporate checking account than what you have going out, the day is going to come when the bank's going to be knocking on the door and saying, we want to collect our monies. In your report, sorry? In your report, on page 5, where the line item is that says taxes, is that assuming the maximum tax increase?
Based on the current valuation of property, that's correct.
Okay. On page 6, I think you gave a good analysis here of an average family. I don't know so much about individuals at $75,000 a year, but an average family, I think that's probably reasonable. These calculations, are they based upon the average employee in the business world? Is that with an assumption that they're going to get a 3 or 4% raise every year?
In the scenario that I put in the slide, I can't speak to that. I mean,
No, and I wouldn't expect you to, because in my business world, we don't go every single year and you always have a raise. So here we have the taxpayer who has an income that isn't rising to the level of the cost of running city government is rising. But they still have to pay for it. You said, credit card, unsecured debt of approximately $240,000. So if you were to translate that into city government, how would you relate that credit card? What would you relate that credit card debt to us here in government?
Well, your secured debt would be your general obligation bonds. Your unsecured long-term debt would be your pensions and your OPEB.
So that would be essentially the credit card.
That's the analysis that we were making.
Over the last amount of years that you did the research, has that credit card debt increased?
Yearly, yep.
Yearly, increased.
For most municipalities, it does.
So am I accurate when I say I would compare that to the average family's credit card and something they're only paying the interest on because the principal continues to grow?
Correct. You're still using the credit card, so the principal would increase, and ultimately your interest payments would increase as well in this analogy.
Something on page 7, I think that it would help for some folks. You have, under short term, you have ignore capital assets, long-term obligations. Could you just run through that again, please? What does that mean?
Certainly. If you're a family, is your short-term focus going to be the addition that you want to put on your house, or is your short-term focus going to be on paying your mortgage, feeding your family? So when you look at municipalities' financial statements, there's 2 layers of financial statements. You've got your governmental funds, which is your general fund, and that's a short-term focus where you're just focused on paying next month's salaries, paying next month's accounts payable, and then you've got your government-wide financial statements, which are before the governmental, and that's a focus on your buildings, your schools, your equipment, and the general obligation debt that goes along with funding those assets, along with your pension and with your OPEB.
So to expand a little further, keeping the taxpayer in mind, and that's not just the residential taxpayer. Also, I'm speaking to the commercial taxpayer, the business folks throughout the city of Warwick. And I'm only speaking to the city of Warwick because that's where my responsibility lies, is in the city of Warwick. Be, good, bad, or indifferent compared to other communities. For me, the issue is, what do we have here in the city of Warwick? How are we dealing with it? How are we going to cope? So you have, again, that family of four living on that modest income. They have to make choices. And I think you just touched on something very good. Oftentimes, that choice is having to pay an increase in taxes or pay more for their water bill because the infrastructure has been ignored for the last 18, 20 years. And by the way, these problems didn't occur just in the past year and a half. These problems have been growing for the last 18, 20 years, and they've just been allowed to grow and grow and grow. And here we are now, and I say kudos to everyone here in this room. Here we are now having what I would consider a very intelligent debate and a very intelligent conversation, and certainly for a lot of folks, very eye-opening conversation. So we have the average homeowner who, if all of these costs continue to increase because of our cost of running city government, they're going to have to make a choice. That's a difficult choice to make. We have choices, and they're not going to be easy choices to make. And some of those choices are going to be painful. But those are choices that, first, we have to recognize are necessary, and secondly, we have to be prepared to make those choices. And it's not just here on the city council, it's everyone in the city of Warwick. Kyle, we received something the other day. I think someone touched on that a moment ago, which is the general fund, the preliminary statement of revenues and expenditures. So I'm a little confused with something. I need you to explain it. Going down this sheet, it shows us with the beginning unassigned fund balance in July 1st, 2018 at $22,671,446. And then it shows us an estimated unassigned fund balance at June 30th, 2019 of $25,344,000. And at the very bottom, as of June 30th, 2019, it shows us with an estimated ending unassigned fund balance of $22,553,470. Does that mean that, we have this revenue over expenditures in the very first item? Does that mean we have a truly $55,563,000? Or does it mean something different? I need you to explain that.
Right. My understanding is that the top number that you're looking
Do you want
at...
this sheet?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I obviously can't speak to these numbers because they're unaudited, and I don't know what they represent really.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
Right.
I didn't hear it.
These numbers are not audited numbers,
Okay.
so they're directly from what I
Okay.
would assume is the finance department.
All right, fair enough.
So I certainly can't speak to their legitimacy, but it looks as though they're considering that initial line that you pointed out, the 5.5 million, as in excess of revenue over expenditures. But I believe that's on a budgetary basis. There's a lot of confusion when you look at a budget versus actual for a municipality, because it doesn't have to be shown the same way as the GAAP financial statements are shown. They were anticipating using fund balance. They were not anticipating, looks like a school department FY19 deficit that they're thinking is going to come in around 2.9 million or so. But I think what I get out of looking at this is you had a beginning unassigned fund balance of 22.6 million, which was the audited figure that came straight out of your June 30, 2018 financial statements. And at the bottom, you've got an estimated ending unassigned fund balance of 22.5 million, which would be a decrease of a little over $100,000. So without really, sitting with the finance department and figuring out what their methodology is for showing a budgetary surplus versus what looks to be a GAAP deficit, I wouldn't necessarily know exactly what those middle figures represent.
Okay.
Brian, did you want to address?
Excuse me, Mr. President.
Oh, sorry.
I still got a few more things. Did you want Brian to come and speak to that now? Oh, sure, fine. Okay.
Brian, could you answer Kyle's question?
Sorry, what's your question?
Looks like there's a budgetary surplus, 5.5.
Correct.
I guess just curious what these two figures represent, getting down to lower anticipated. Is that money that's going towards FY20, where you had a 3.5 anticipated use, but now you're going to lower to 1, or?
So within the statement that's in front of you, the projected results, there's a estimated change in reserves of 350,000. That is for items that have been purchased and have not been received and have not been funded yet. So funds have been reserved for that. That will go to the city's assigned fund balance projected. And the other amount is the designated use of fund balance in the FY20 budget, the 2.4 million. It had been stated a few times tonight that it was 3.5. The number was reduced at the time of budget by budget amendments to 2.4. That's that amount.
So then on a GAAP basis versus a budgetary basis, there was a slight deficit as opposed to a. Okay, that's what I read. Thanks.
So could you?
My calculation that I put on that sheet was accurate.
Provided that the preliminary figures stand to be the correct figures. But I don't know.
In the real world here, when government gets into a position where they're spending more than they're taking in, how they correct that typically is raise taxes, or a combination of things. Raise taxes and cut services, or ignore infrastructure, such as all those items that I already mentioned. The taxpayer doesn't have that luxury of raising taxes. They don't have the option to go to their boss and say, listen, this is what my costs have increased because of ABC, and I need you to give me a raise. They don't have that luxury because it doesn't work. So here we are. And we have your GPS forecast, which is a guideline, some sort of a roadmap. And we haven't had that in a long time. But the thing I take away of particular importance in all of this is recognizing and admitting that we have got to change. We have got to make changes. Healthcare isn't what it was 20 years ago. It's no longer a $3,000 a year benefit. It's a $20,000 to $23,000 a year benefit. All the associated costs with running the city have changed. And the most we can raise taxes is $8 million. I'm ready to take on those issues. I appreciate your forecasts. I recognize it is a forecast. It can change like the weather forecast does. But now we at least have something to somewhat set us on a path of dealing with these things. It's going to be long-term, and there's going to be some pain. But I think we can get there. I think we have the people in place, both in the administration and on the city council, to get us there. And the way we're going to get there is through negotiation, through cooperation, and through some sacrifice. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Kyle, just go back to that point that Brian made. Could you just put that in a little bit more layman's terms? There was a surplus of 5.5 in certain line items, but then it was offset. How would you explain that?
Yeah, it's just a matter of how the data is presented. GASB standards allow for the budgetary basis of accounting. So if you didn't budget for an extra $3 million in state aid, or you got a grant that went into your general fund that you hadn't budgeted for it originally, you probably shouldn't count it as budgetary revenue because you didn't budget for it. So there's a lot of line items that go into creating that surplus. But I think at the end of the day, and which is what Brian just spoke to, overall your savings account, at the end of fiscal 19 is going to decrease almost 120,000. Now, to put that in comparison, I believe it was anticipated in that FY19 budget that there would be a use of 3.8 million. So it's considerably less than the structural deficit that was built into the budget, but it certainly isn't, on a GAAP basis, a surplus.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from council members? Councilman Lattisaw. Could you speak into the mic?
So how is it? This was discussed in 2008. Here we are in 2018, and we spoke about some of the things that haven't been done. So we can balance budgets. We can balance budgets every year. And you can balance them by cutting programs, cutting services, not dealing with infrastructure. But what's important to remember is even though you choose to do that, it doesn't mean that all those problems go away. It just means that, you're going to take it on next year, or someone else will take it on, in 2 or 3 years from now. And that certainly isn't sustainable either. Thank you.
Kyle, can you give us an estimate of what happens if OPEB liability from the city stops at age 65, similar to the school department?
I'd have to look at the total active members in each plan, which I don't have in front of me. But I would assume if that were the case, it would be significantly lower liability than you're currently showing.
Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions from council members? Is there any questions from members of the public? And this is to be to the actuary. Mr. Cody.
Thank you, Councilman Marola. I've got a couple of questions, but I have a number of observations that I'd like to make first. I think the residents of Warwick have been waiting for this important financial information for a very long time. I'm also glad to see the screens working tonight. But information that is so pertinent to the decisions that are being made by families, I'm a little incensed at the fact that the CEO of the city is not here. I would think that information this important and this vital, and as vital it is to the city, that the mayor would be here. And I think that sends a message to the taxpayers. It's a level of contempt that this information is not pertinent to him while he's making decisions that affect every single person in this audience and every taxpayer. And quite frankly, I think it's despicable. Another comment I'd like to make. My observation with the City Council pertaining to these 5-year forecasts and the financial data, members, there seems to be this general attitude that it's okay to kind of downplay the severity of this. And it's almost like it's justifying poor financial municipal behavior and decisions by citing examples of worse municipal decisions. Who really cares what other municipalities have for debt? It's not, it doesn't affect Warwick. We're talking about Warwick. And one of the questions I had is, when did the City Council actually get this latest and greatest in their hands? Could someone answer that question to me?
I can answer that. I had asked Kyle to update it when the actuarial numbers were presented to us a few weeks ago. As you know, we got the audited numbers in July.
So this 5-year forecast that we're discussing tonight, when did the council get it? Did they get it prior to this evening?
Well, we handed out the one 2 weeks ago, and I had asked him to update it with examples so we could understand what those numbers were.
Right.
So I don't know. I'll have to ask Kyle if there was significant changes between, the actuarial numbers and what was handed out to the council a few weeks back when we all agreed to have a special meeting instead of this meeting, if that's your question.
Well, I can answer that question. That what you handed out on August 19th and what we have today, there's a $7.8 million difference in the liabilities. But again, you're not answering my question. Like, for example, my councilman from Ward 7, when did he actually get this in his hand and read it for the first time?
This presentation tonight, everybody received tonight.
Tonight?
Yes.
Okay. So that, again, I'm a little bit incensed about, because you get something of such importance and you get it just when you walk in the door. So you haven't had time to digest it, review it, or consume it, right? So because you don't even have the basic knowledge and understanding of a document that affects everyone in the city, you're sitting here on our time trying to figure it out. That's deplorable.
Mr. Cody,
but the point is, on August 19th, these people sat here for 5.5 hours and it was canceled. And on August 19th, the unfunded the 5-year forecast showed that we had a $121 million shortfall over 5 years. Now we have the audited numbers that are $127.8 million. So it got worse in a couple of weeks. As you recall, the draft copy of July 12, 2018 from YKSM, now Markham, was $130 million. So when you average this all out, you're looking at a 1 to 2% margin of error over the course of 3 5-year projections, none of which, no matter what you do and no matter how creative you get with the accounting, none of them show that we're on good, stable financial grounds. And one of the things that begs the question for me, and as some of you council members know that I've communicated with personally, if you have this 5-year forecast before you were going to renew and ratify 2 union contracts, would that have changed your vote? Betsy, the answer is yes. I have to tell you, Councilman, as we all know, we watched the actuary for OPEB a couple of weeks back. And that doesn't paint a rosy picture of $352 million of unfunded liabilities, but that's assuming that we're making 3% of nothing, which is nothing, but that nothing amounts to $90 million. Add the schools in, and it's just shy of $500 million in unfunded liabilities. So for 10 years, I've been coming and I've listened to the actuaries from the pension side and from the OPEB side for 10 years. And over that time, I've heard council members talk about it, how bad it is, and, you know, we got to do something about it. And I know Councilman Morrow, tonight you said, you know, we have to take the first step. So I'm confused. What's the first step? Can anyone tell me what the first step is? Because I've been coming for 10 years and I haven't seen the first step. So I don't know what the first step is. So the first step is, after the actuaries come and they have a report, go home and, you know, we're going to have to do this again next year. What happens is, if you have somebody that's competent and that's paying attention and that's representing these people, what they do is at the end of the council meeting, when the clerk says, we're going to the docket session, does anyone have anything to docket to put on the agenda so we can legally discuss it? That's the and that never happens. And I wonder why that's not happening, Mr. Morello. Why is it, think about this, and after yourself and other council members and former Councilman Solomon speak so much about how this is going to devastate our community and so on, we're going to fall off the cliff. Nobody says at the docket session, Ward 7, I'd like to docket time on the agenda to speak about taking the first steps to solving this problem. And because of that, we don't take that first step. The next year we come and we talk about it again, and everyone goes home and we still don't take the first step. So what I'd like to know from my councilman, are you going to take the first step at the next council meeting and during the docket session, docket time on the agenda? Because as everybody knows, according to the Open Meetings Act, if it's not on the agenda, we legally cannot discuss the matter.
Mr. Cody, I can tell you that there's been an ordinance that's been docketed several months ago entitled Healthcare. And I know Councilman Lattisaw has been talking about it. I've been talking to Councilman Lattisaw about it too. I think that the point of tonight's meeting is, do we all agree on where we are? Because when you address those issues in those ordinances, and you've sat through many councils,
Yeah.
and you've seen many votes on different issues, if we don't all have our oars in the water at the same time, agreeing that that's the direction that we're going in, then the ship spins, right? Some oars are rowing forward and some oars are rowing backwards, and I think that that's a great point. But, you know, there has been an ordinance, I can tell you, docketed, and, you know, OPEB is a big issue. And I think it needs to be addressed. I think a lot of council members agree that it needs to be addressed. And I think that that's a subject that's going to come up for debate. And, you know, hopefully you get a good turnout and a good discussion about where we need to go. Thank you. Yes, ma'am, if you could identify yourself for the record.
Melissa Shine, Ward 5. You're talking about a family household of 75K. I don't make 75K, and I think everybody in this audience made a big sacrifice this year when they got their tax bill. And I don't believe that we want to see our tax bills go up again. Are they going to go up again this year, this coming year? Like another 4%? Is that a solution?
Yeah, I mean, those are questions that will come up, but that's what we're discussing tonight, the long-term plan and how to best address those issues.
Yeah, well, I just think that a lot of us took more of a hit than other people did on this tax bill, which was just outrageous, our property taxes. And I forecasted mine for next year based on 4%. Mine are going up again, not by as much as some other people's, but I mean, I don't think the citizens of Warwick can take anymore. I mean, they really can't, especially when you're saying the infrastructure is collapsing, the schools aren't doing so well. I mean, it just can't come from us. It has to be sucked in from everywhere. Agree? So we don't have any solutions?
That's not what the discussion is tonight. The discussion is tonight where we are.
Okay, so do we all agree that we're on shaky ground with this?
I think you can
Yeah.
poll everybody
Yeah.
after, but it's probably,
Yeah.
I think that I saw a lot of heads nodding here tonight that
Right.
they recognize it as issues.
But I think a lot of heads are going to be nodding when they say they don't want their taxes to go up anymore, especially because of last year. Last year's was so huge for most of us. I know people on the council, their taxes went up because I ran your numbers too. Some didn't, some don't own a house, but I know yours went up also. So.
Yep. Councilman Ricks?
Very briefly, I want to just bring to your attention that there is an item on the next council meeting docket on October 7th that is relevant to those issues. So I'd encourage you to check out that docket and perhaps come to this upcoming meeting on October 7th. Thank you.
I come to most of the meetings.
Thank you. Mr. Cushman.
Hi, just Robert Cushman from Ward 1. First of all, I want to thank the City Council for actually having this meeting and developing a 5-year plan. I mean, it's something that I've been talking about for 10 years. And as the council president, you adhered to that. We haven't had something like this in a while. And, I know there's some members from the school department here, the superintendent's here, and I went to their first meeting where they're having their 5-year forecast plan. And I know Councilman Sinapi is going to be the go-between, the bridge between the school department and the city council. And, what I'm hoping for is that when the school department gets their 5-year projections, we don't want to see, we have a vanilla, you said it was vanilla. We have a vanilla 5-year projection that's based on assumptions that no new programs and no new services are going to be developed in the next 5 years. We all know that's totally unrealistic. The school department, I believe, had 46 line items on their priority list, and I think by getting the $4 million, they restored 1 to 17. Doesn't mean 18 to 46 went away. You know what I'm saying? So Councilman Lattisaw alluded to it. Because you decide not to fund something, doesn't mean it goes away. And, Councilman McAllister, you made a point about, maybe the surplus and things like that, but we took, and everybody talked about this, we're going to have, last year, $5 million to repair our roads. We didn't spend $5 million on roads. I think we spent $2 million because we had to take $3 million out of that in the 2018 fiscal year to plug holes. Then this budget season, we had, I think, was it 4.5 million for roads? We took 3 million and we gave it to the schools. Are our roads in better shape because we cut the road paving budget, $3 million? No. Is there still a need to fix our roads for maybe $3 million more? Yes. So the thing is, you know, we talk about unfunded liabilities on paper, and Gatsby, and we have all these crazy terms, and now we have pensions, and we have OPEB, and we can see we got $800 million in unfunded liabilities on paper. What isn't on paper? Our roads are falling apart, we're not repairing them, right? Our infrastructure, our sewer lines and our water lines are falling apart, right? And we have no plan right now to fix those things. So those are the unfunded liabilities that are on this 5-year plan. So I'm hoping when the school department's 5-year projection is done, years ago, Councilman Marola remembers this, Councilwoman Travis remembers this, RIPAC came in. 13 years ago when I was on the school committee, they did a great report. Big changes we could make to save money. You know what we did with that report? We put it in somebody's desk and we never looked at it again. We didn't do anything. So this should be a living document, this 5-year forecast. Same thing with the school department. You should link it together, the bottom line. You should have the ability when the budget hearings come to be able to bring a spreadsheet up that has the school department's 5-year plan plugged into it and has the city 5-year plan plugged into it. And you have switches that says, I want to fund this program. I want to fund this program. Now, we're not going to fund this program. What effect is that going to have on the city budget from year 1 to year 5? What effect is it going to have on the tax rate? We are so antiquated in the city, it's like, you know, we make this resolution, we make a change, this and that, then we got to go in the back room and figure it out. We have computers now that can do that, online, real time, so when you make a decision to increase your asphalt line item $3.5 million, what effect is that going to have on the tax rate? What effect is that going to ripple through 5 years? So, a couple other points. So we have the vanilla plan. The vanilla plan has a $12.8 million deficit with a maximum tax increase with no new programs and services. Now, I understand that might change a little because we had some new budget projections come in. In 2025, I don't know, Kyle, if you want to bring the slide up. But so in 2025, there's something called capital budget, city and schools. There's nothing there. So I guess my first question is, what does that mean? 2025.
So the city has a capital budget for the city and the school, and it only projects out 4 years. So it projects out 2021 through 2024, which is why we don't include those costs in 2020. Reasonably, I wouldn't be able to estimate them.
And these line items reflect what? Fixtures to buildings, and I mean, what are these dollars reflect? What kind of costs?
Correct. So that would be, potentially equipment. I don't have the capital budget in front of me. They're all for various items. Potential future leases for equipment, vehicles. Building improvements are included in those figures as well.
So the only point I'm making, the fact that we have big zeros up there doesn't mean they're going to stay zeros. You guys just haven't decided yet that you're going to make lease purchases or other kind of purchases go out. But my point is, you know, we're going to need more money, right, for these kinds of things. And the fact that you got a $12.8 million deficit, so what does that mean? That means somewhere within all these line items and all these programs and services, and wait till we plug the school department in, I bet it's going to be $30 million. And I'm not making any criticism because they're going to be putting in requests for new programs and services that they need. Computer service, things that they can't live without. The fact of the matter is that you're going to have to stop prioritizing what is more important to spend and what isn't, and you're going to have to make cuts, right? Because we're not going to have a maximum tax increase for 5 years and have a $20 million deficit. We just can't do that. So that's my whole point. We're going to have to come up priorities, and there's more to this, you know, than meets the eye. So one other point. You know, we're talking about the 5-year forecast and we're talking about the future. I want to talk about the past. I was on the council 2007 and 2008. I've been keeping a database of the city and school trends for 15 years, and I want to share with you the trends that have developed in the city that are going on right now and are moving forward. I think people downplay the severity of what's going on because people say, we got a AA bond rating, but we just learned today that the bonding agencies don't look at the short-term credit card debt, which is pensions and OPEB. So that means if I have $240,000 on my credit card and only $15,000 on my car loan, I could go to the bank and say, they're going to say, Bob, we're going to give you another $250,000. That's totally unrealistic, but that's what we're talking about. So when people want to do press releases that say, we got a AA bond rating, think about that analogy for a second. You could be swimming in debt, but the bond agencies are not looking at that. It does not mean you're not in a fiscal crisis. So let's get that right off the table right then and there. So 2004, this is the city budget. We spent 11% of the budget on capital expenses and debt. What are we talking about? Lease purchases, right? Bonding to fix up schools, bonding to fix up city buildings, right? In 2020, we're spending $9.7 million. We're spending less money now on capital debt and expenses than we were 15 years ago. It's 6% of the budget. It was 11% in 2004. What does that mean? I was sitting on the council in 2007 when we froze all that bond spending. I was on the school committee in 2006 when we passed a $25 million bond. I think we finally spent that. That should have been spent years ago. What did we do? We froze all of our borrowing. Sometimes borrowing is good, right? Because you need to fix things up. So what we've done in 15 years is we basically level funded the capital expenses. Actually, we didn't even level fund it. It's 6% of the budget now. It used to be 11%. And that's why everything's falling apart, because we're not borrowing to fix things up. Now, the thing is, we can borrow now because the credit agencies will let us do that. But here's the problem. When you look at active employee expenses, 15 years ago, it was 57% of the budget. It's only 51 now. It's going down. When we look at retired employee expenses, that's pensions and health care. It was $18 million. It was 19% of the budget 15 years ago. You know what it is now? 30%. We went from 19% of the budget to 30% of the budget. And then there's all other spending. It was about $12 million, 13% of the budget. It's 14% of the budget now. So everything else in the city that we needed to spend money on, we've basically kind of been flat in terms of the percentage of the budget. So where's all the money going to? How did we get from 19% of the budget in 2004 to 30% in 2020? I did a calculation. In the last 15 years, we've provided $61.2 million in new tax dollars on the city budget. 44% of that went to retired employee benefits. What does that mean? That means out of every $1 in taxes we raised over the last 15 years, 44 cents of that dollar went to people that used to work for the city that performed services in the past. Councilman Lanisow, if you had to take that out of your business, I think you would go bankrupt if you had to pay 44 cents of every profit you made, every dollar. You wouldn't stay in business. That's where we are in the city right now. And that's the trend right now for 15 years. And do you think that's going to get better? It's not going to get better because we've already heard the forecast over here. Our health care costs are going higher for retirees. Our pension costs are going higher for retirees. The actuarial came in, and I don't think people sometimes realize, where he said we need to have a 2.7% increase over the next 10, 15 years to make this payment. How are we going to do that? You, Councilman, the President, Morella, I think one of the greatest quotes we ever got made from the actuary is, They don't care whether we could pay the bill or not. They just tell you how much you have to pay. They don't look at the impact. Back in 2007, when I was on the council, we used to have a department. Councilwoman Travis remembers this. Councilman Roller remembers it. It was called Youth Services. You know what it did? After-school programs for kids. If you look at the budget now, there's no such department called Youth Services. You know why? We cut it. It's gone. We had another department called Family Services. Guess what? It's gone. It's not there. Why isn't it there? Because the retired employee expenses are consuming 44% of our new tax dollars. And I just want people to get something for perspective here. I looked at 6 employees who retired, and I'm not going to say which department they came from in 2016. I looked at 6 employees, and I calculated, and this I did a Freedom of Information request to get this information. Through these 6 employees' entire career with the city, they contributed $764,056 into the pension fund. Over the next 20 years, because of compounded COLAs that we give for our pension plans, they're going to get in retirement benefits $11,139,077. So think about that for a second. Think about that for a second. That doesn't count the free lifetime health care that they get either. This is totally unsustainable. Here's the recommendation I'm going to make to the city council. You need to study, because, we look at the benefits. There's so many different benefit plans. There's so many different employees that get benefits. I was on the Beacon blog a couple of weeks ago, and, people use their alias names and things like that, and I know this was a union person. They basically came and they said, employees prior to 1998, a lot of them didn't get lifetime health care. Lifetime health care came in with the Scott Avedisian administration, where he basically opened up Pandora's box and gave it to everybody. So the problems exploded in the last 20 years because we gave away lifetime health care. This council needs to go in, and somebody needs to do a study and find out all the different variations of these benefits, what they are, what we're paying, and we're going to get to a point where we have to decide, should we be paying one employee $175,000 a year in a pension 20 years from now? Is there a point in time where we have to say we need to max out certain benefits? Because that's what we have here. We have one employee over the next 20 years that's going to get $2.6 million in pension payments. His pension's going to be $175,000 a year on top of lifetime health care. There's got to be a point in time where we have to say is that we need to reprioritize. We need massive cuts. I hate to say this. We have $400 million in OPEB unfunded liabilities. We're doing pay-as-you-go. So, we talk about these big numbers, Councilman McAllister. We can't even afford to pay-as-you-go. We're paying 44 cents on the dollar of new taxes every single year to pay for these benefits. I don't care about the big numbers. I don't care about pay-as-you-go. I don't care about an OPEB trust fund. We can't afford pay-as-you-go. So this council needs to educate the residents of the city, and I think if we find out there's, Councilman Ladislaw, you just said to me, and I wasn't even, we have people making $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a month in a pension. That's $108,000 a year in a pension. Can we afford that? How about the people on, on Medicare and the senior citizens who are lucky if they get 1.5% COLA for Social Security? The city can do certain things, and this is my own opinion. I know the unions aren't going to like me saying that. This city can declare a financial emergency. Mayor Solomon can declare a financial emergency. You know what? Cranston did that. And you know what Cranston did? They froze the COLAs for 10 years. We're giving 3% compounded COLAs for retirees and police too and fire too. We're going to be giving any COLAs right now. We can't afford it. We need to look at the entire structure of employee retirement benefits, and we need to start doing a study first, because you know what? When you don't know what you're giving out or you don't know what the benefits are, how could you even propose any kind of changes? This is a complicated process here. We need to get all the facts out, and then we need to start making decisions. Do we want to build school buildings? You know, one last point here, because I made a litany of stuff, and I just, you know, I want to ask a question maybe to Kyle, but I'm reading the paper, and I made a list over here. So right now, there's an ongoing discussion I read in the paper to give $80 million more in bond money to schools, right? This is above the $40 million you just gave them, right? So you're talking about that now. I just read an article in the Beacon where we're talking about $90 million to possibly build a high school. That's going to be for bonding, right? And I have a question. So in this presentation, we said 75% of, I think you said the capital assets are depreciated. And I think they're worth $400 million. So that means we have, what, $300 million's been depreciated, and that was like 75%. And I think, did you label that red or yellow? I think you had it. Was it yellow? So, and I'm going to do some quick math off the top of my head. If we wanted to get that to 50%, it would cost us $100 million, right? I mean, do you know what the, you know, you said 75% is yellow. What gets you to green? So if we wanted to go to 50% and for all our, you know, buildings to get them fixed up, to get all this depreciating down to 50, we had $100 million more. So 80 million to the schools, 100 million for a new high school, 100 million to get all our buildings and equipment up to a 50% level. We need another 100 million for the water department. I mean, you know, we probably could borrow 200 million. You said we're in the green with that. We could probably go out and borrow. But if we go out and borrow, what does that mean? It means the minimum requirement payments are going to go higher and higher. So my point is, if we plugged all that stuff in here over like the next 30 years, $300 million in bonds, what's it going to do to this? What are we going to be, you know, $25 million in debt? We can't keep borrowing. We have to cut some things. We have to cut the expenses that we're paying for these retirement programs that are unsustainable. Take that money back. And just one last point. We talked about the school department has an OPEB liability of $50 million. Their employees go off the system at 65. We're at 350 or even maybe higher because they got a crazy discount rate. I'm just going to say this at a minimum. If you mirrored the school department, you would probably save at least $300 million. That $10 million that you're paying every single year, the school department's paying $600,000, $700,000 for a retired employee. You would save almost $10 million a year. Imagine what you could do with $50 million over the next 5 years, right? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about kicking people to the streets or whatever. We're talking about what's the priorities in the city. If you're getting an $85,000, $90,000 pension, I don't think you should be getting free lifetime health care. If you're 80 years old and you're a widow or something like that, you could talk about things like that. But those are the decisions you have to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? You just identify yourself for the record.
Dan Pizzaturo. I'm trying to give you solutions to maybe the problems that you have because I'm a victim of the solutions. And any of your councilmen can ask me any question while I go through this. You won't be interrupting me. I taught for 30 years, figuring that I would have a COLA. When it came to the time that I had a COLA, I think you have to wait 3 years before the COLA kicks in. It did kick in. I experienced it for 2 years. And then our governor decided that COLAs were too expensive for the state. It was an $8.2 billion budget that she had for COLAs, for teachers and state employees. And she told us that we had to take a haircut. And we took a haircut and eliminated the COLAs completely. That is costing my family $3,000 a year. My wife was a school psychologist for 30 years. As a result of that, I went out to Connecticut and taught for 16 more years to subsidize our income. And I worked at a Brewster's on Allens Avenue for about 15 years at 3% commission to supplement it. and I was in the Air National Guard for 24 years. The reason we got cut as teachers was because we were the low-hanging fruit. As retirees, we didn't have a union. We had a rally at the State House. There were like 3,000 people there. My wife and I went. I thought that we would have no problem because I saw 2 trucks that said AFL-CIO. And I said, Joan, we don't have a problem. We'll just shut down the state. That didn't happen. It didn't happen because we didn't have a union as retirees. Now, why am I bringing this up? It might be the low-hanging fruit that you may have to go for. I'm a solutions type person. You have firemen that are retired and policemen that are retired. Teachers already took their cut for COLAs. Am I right, Mr. Thornton? Yeah, they took it. And also, they don't have health for life. When you're 65, it drops and you have to pick up Medicare and then you have to supplement it with some other health program. So you have retirees that do not have legal authority or a union that is as hard as the people that are actually working as firemen and policemen. That could be a solution for you. And that'll save you a great deal of money. Now, firemen and policemen, do they stop at 65 and go onto Medicare? Or does the city continue to pay? I don't know.
A little bit of both, depending on when they came in.
Okay. So they would probably have to do what teachers have been doing for the past, I think it happened in 2011 or something like that. So do you have any questions about how you could possibly do this? Believe me, they don't have they don't have an established union. They will fight you. The policemen and firemen will fight you. They will try to get you. We had lawyers. We hired, there were 65 of us, and we challenged the authority whether it was a real contract. Now, in '69, when I started, I figured that after 30 years, I'd have a COLA, and I signed the forms, the whole thing. And then when it came to the 30 years and I retired, the COLA was cut. And they told us it doesn't matter. And we had a judge, I won't mention his name. We talked to him, and he actually told us, go ahead, challenge it. You might win in court, and they may say you had a legal contract, but he said then the legislators will just change the wording, and you'll have to start all over again. So he said, don't do it. You're wasting your money. And all the lawyers just folded and folded and folded that we had hired. So we took the haircut. So if you have any questions, ask. I'll tell you exactly what's going on. But that's how you can do it. And it won't be easy. You guys will get so much. And teachers are not militant. If you do something like that, you will have firemen and policemen all over this place staring you down. But when they did this to teachers are not militant. And they don't fight like firemen and policemen will fight. So if you do that route, expect to have a tough route. But teachers are very easygoing. They're sacrificial lambs, and that's what happened. That's how we took a cut in our COLA. I was a union person for a number of years, and I was ready to shut down the state. I didn't give a damn because we thought we had a 3% COLA. It wasn't compounded. I don't know why whether it comes up with compounded COLAs. I mean, you get your 3%, let's say, whatever it is, and next year you get 3% on the principal. But it doesn't keep going as an extensive amount like compounded COLAs that people have. So the other thing is when your COLA is frozen, and teachers have frozen COLAs, and that means that their salary, let's say they got 65% of their, let's say they don't make 100,000. I mean, I retired at like 65,000, so I got 57% of that. And now I'm frozen. So if I was up here when I retired and my cost of living was what it is, every year the cost of living goes higher, and I'm going lower and lower and lower, and I'm going to get to the poverty level eventually. Imagine that. Teachers that teach 30, 35 years, eventually go into a poverty level after about 20 years after retirement. That's all I got. Any questions, gentlemen, ladies? Thank you.
Thank you. Just identify yourself for the record.
Good evening, Roger Durand. Let me begin by thanking you, Councilman Marola, Council President, for having this meeting. I heard the Councilman Lattisaw say he was here 10 years ago. I started 13 years ago. I can answer. I say I started here 13 years ago because of a tax increase. My neighbor had me come down here. Councilman Solomon was council president at the time. Candidly, he was going after the fire department for overtime. Boy, that never changes, huh? 13 years ago. But again, I want to thank you for having this meeting because I thought of something tonight. Of all the council meetings I've attended over the years, we spend more time in public safety talking about tire replacements than we do about the fiscal health of the city. Think about that for a minute. Think about the countless hours you spend here at council meetings talking about what pothole we hit. I'm not saying we shouldn't, by the way. I think the citizens should be heard. But when do we discuss the important issues? Pensions and health care? Never. So let me make a suggestion. Why don't you set up a committee, a city council committee, called the Fiscal Outlook Committee, and once a month inform the taxpayers as to what's going on with the fiscal condition of the city? Just a suggestion, because I know you're always looking for solutions. And I appreciate what Mr. Lattisaw, Councilman Lattisaw, Mr. Howe, Mr. McAllister do at the Finance Committee. But think, what we're talking about tonight is millions of dollars. Millions of dollars. So again, thank you for having this meeting. I think it's very appropriate. One of the comments I made 13 years ago, I went back and checked my notes. At the time, some of you might have remembered some of the older members of the city council, and I don't say that in a pejorative sense, but you might remember watching the Super Bowl with John Hancock used to run commercials. Real people, real problems. And I got up and I talked about that. Let me talk about it tonight. I'm hearing all this chatter. I haven't been to council meetings. I try to avoid them as much as possible. But I'm hearing all this chatter and I'm reading in the newspaper, and we'll get into it in a couple minutes. But I'm confused. I'm really confused. Let's talk the real world here. As I talked up at the State House about this, and you can check it on the internet 7 years ago about pensions and health care, we're having a philosophical discussion here tonight. Let's talk real world. My taxes went up 10% this year. So I hear how fantastic, and by the way, that's not a reflection on the present mayor, Mayor Solomon. As Councilman Lattisaw talked about, these problems have been originating for 18 years. I know who caused the problems, Avedisian. Because I talked to him 13 years ago about this. We saw this coming 13 years ago regarding pensions and health care. It got us nowhere. But having said that, I'm confused. I read in the paper about S&P evaluations, $5.5 million surplus. And I'm writing out a check today to the city of Warwick with a 10% tax increase. So where I live, it doesn't look good. So we can talk all we want about how great things are. And again, it's not a reflection on this council, nor is it a reflection on this mayor, Solomon. All these problems originated in the past. So let's talk about the tax increase. One of the things that really perturbed me, I happened to go back and check the tape the other day when the healthcare actuary was here. I almost fell off the chair when he says, well, in New York, they have a law. You just referred to it, Councilman McAllister. Well, they have a law where they don't even have to record their OPEB obligations. Excuse me? Are you serious? So I went and did a Google search today. I happened to be born in New York. I lived there until my father got transferred up here when I went to Hendricken. But I know I meet in Florida over the winter. All the people from New York and New Jersey say, we can't afford it anymore. We're leaving. The taxes are too high. So, Mr. McAllister, let me give you 2 points. You referred to New York State tonight. New York State, according to, and I wrote it down, a business publication, the latest statistics in 2016, 2017, the highest migration of any state in the union of people leaving the state because of high taxes is New York. That's point number one. Point number two is the second highest per capita indebtedness for citizens is New York State. You didn't make the comment, it was the actuarial. I wouldn't be setting us up as a model to follow New York State. Just a point. Now let's talk about the S&P rating. I bristled when I hear about that. We have a double A. Councilman Marola referred to it today. Back in 2008. Now I know this is dear to Mr. Councilman Corley when we talk about S&P. Well, S&P doesn't only affect the big boys. Let me tell you a little story. I have a copy here of an article. Again, Google's great. Absolutely fantastic. You can look up all this information. I happened to buy bonds. I'll tell you a quick little story. I bought bonds, and I got members of my family to buy bonds, mortgage bonds, in 2008. Legg Mason in Providence sold them to me. Unfortunately, it was an IRA account. I couldn't even write off the indebtedness, the loss. Those bonds had AAA S&P rating, implied guaranteed by the United States government. That's what I was told. I had the documentation. I had my brother buy them. He still reminds me of it every day. I lost a lot of money on that. A lot of money. And it was an IRA account, so I couldn't write it off, the loss. So I did a Google search today. Interesting article last year, published by Motley Financial. I'm not going to read it to you, but what it does, not the whole thing. But what it says is, the rating agencies are always the last to know. That's the lead article. I'll give you cites, just 1 or 2 points. Everybody familiar with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? You get a mortgage, they underwrite it. They talk about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac having a AAA rating the day they went into conservatorship. Broke. So we're quoting S&P like they're the gold standard. You ever hear of AIG, the insurance company? They had They had an A rating the day they went bankrupt. Of course, we all remember Enron. They had an investment grade rating. So again, my point is, and I'm not going to belabor on this, when I hear, in my particular case, a double A rating from S&P, I bristle. It means nothing to me. It's that piece of paper you can blow your nose with, in my book. I have a problem with it. But getting beyond that particular point, let's talk about what's driving the problems in the city of Warwick. It's pensions and health care. A comment was made, and again, by the way, thanks to the city council and the administration for having this all on the internet, so you can go back and check it all, listen to it. You don't have to be here, you can listen to it. One of the council members asked Mr. Newton, our good friends from Gabriel and Rhoda, he made a comment, is there any bad news? Because Mr. Newton just gave a presentation to the city council. Everything's great. Our 4 pension plans, the only one we got a problem with is police and fire 1. Everything else is terrific. I really think what the question should have been, not if there's any problems. The question should have been, how much does it cost us to bring our pension plans to where they are today? That's what the question should be. My point is this. I can make any pension plan looks good, any pension plan, by putting enough money into it. That's not tough. So let me just ask a question. Mr. McAllister, I understand you do, your line of work is something to do with businesses or whatever, or Chamber of Commerce or something along that idea. Have you ever heard when you're out in the marketplace, what's the average investment for a 401k that a company will make towards an employee's salary? Match? Do you have any idea? Well, on the internet, and I don't want to put you on the spot, I did a Google search today. The average 401k investment for people in private industry, 3%. So if you make $1, you get 3 cents put into it. Now let's go back to why I asked that question. Mr. Newton came up and said everything is fantastic in the pension programs. But at what cost? So let me ask the question. I went back and checked the actuarial tables on the city website for the last contract. If a policeman makes $1, how much do we put in his or her retirement pay? A check every month. Anybody want to guess? I told you what the national average is, 3 cents. Anybody want to guess? 32 cents. That's for police too. Fire too, 26 cents. By the way, it just went up by 6% last year after reading the actuarial tables. Municipal, 20 cents. Quite a difference. Now, by the way, I'm not saying they shouldn't get that. That's not what I'm saying. Because we've been through with Mr. Newton from Gabriel Rhoda. I'm not going to bore you, Mr. McAllister, but you talked about 6.9% return. I, as well as one other member who testified here tonight, had an argument on this floor with Gabriel Rhoda when they had us up at 8%. And we tell them it should be 6.5, but we wouldn't go there on that one. But again, my question to you is, these are the questions that have to be asked because the taxpayers are being hit hard. And again, this is no reflection on the existing administration, nor this council. I want to keep bringing that up. I don't want it published in the paper tomorrow that I'm picking on the current administration or I'm picking on this council, because I'm not. I had many a conversation with Mayor Avedisian on this point at this microphone, which Ms. Travis and Mr. Lattisaw and Mr. Marola can attest to. So this isn't something new. I was after Scott Avedisian for years on this. Nothing was done. That's why we're here today. Another question I'll ask before we get into health care. Gentleman was just up, retired teacher, talking about the COLA. We're giving out 3%, by the way, we're giving out 3% compounded COLAs, not simple COLAs. Compounded. Anybody want to guess for the last 10 years what Social Security has averaged? Did a Google search on that today. 1.5% in Social Security for the last 10 years. And we're paying 3% compounded. By the way, the average Social Security payment per month, Mr. Lattisaw just mentioned, $9,000, $8,000, $7,000, $1,460. Average Social Security. So go to your neighbors who live in the city of Warwick. That's their average. By the way, the one thing that doesn't tell you, though, that doesn't deduct the health care for Medicare. It's about $150 a month. So now you're down to $1,300 a month for your average Social Security. What's the math on that, Ed? $15,000 a year? These are the people who are paying these taxes that we give out. By the way, I told Councilman Marola mentioned this. I used to tell Scott Avedisian, you give out benefits like they're cotton candy. By the way, I used to be screamed at and everything else, but that's beside the point. But anyhow, those are just a couple examples before we get into health care. So again, this problem just didn't originate And I've been talking about this problem for 13 years. I went up to the State House and testified about how ridiculous this thing is in the city of Warwick. In fact, Angel Travaris was mayor of Providence at the time. So Google it. It's on the internet. You can listen to it. The only other thing I would ask before we get into health care, I always see it touted in quotes the 2012 pension reform that the mayor did, ex-mayor did. Has anybody ever seen it? Who designed it? Does anybody know? I hear this 2012, we redesigned the pension plan. Who did it? Because I can tell you what I heard. I heard it was a couple city employees did it. I don't know if that's true. That's what I heard. That's not acceptable. By the way, was it an actuarial study done? I can tell you this. Mayor Avedisian did not do an actuarial study on the on the prescription drug. Because I asked him here at this. He told me he did, and then I called his chief of staff the following day. She told me he didn't do it. Then I called the personnel director and said it doesn't exist. So we're now paying over $4 million a year for for prescription drugs, and there was no actuarial study done? This is the real world here. This is what's gone on. This is what Councilman Lattisaw referred to 18 years ago. Nobody cared. But again, my question is, and maybe Mr. Lattisaw, do me a favor. Find out where the actuarial report is for the 2012 pension reform that Avedisian used to brag about, because I'm sure it doesn't exist. But I'd like to see it if it does. Now, my next thing is, let's get into health care. Council President, could you tell me what our exact number is for unfunded now? Because, I'm confused.
I would defer to Kyle on that. I think it was 352.
How much is that? But that's with the 3%.
Right.
That's with the 3% return,
Yes.
which we're not getting. So let's deal real numbers. What's it, $90 million more, I think you said?
Yes.
So it's at 350, it's going to late 430? No, 440. What am I saying? It was 350, 100 would be 4. All right, so 440 million. So our ARC payment is 38, 30, how much is our ARC?
34.
34 million a year. So how can we be in good shape if our maximum tax increase is $8 million a year and our ARC's 34? I don't know. Sound logical to you, Councilman? How can we be in good shape? Now, besides the fact we don't pay the ARC payment, I mean, I guess that's irrelevant. But one of these days we're going to have to pay it. So again, I don't know what S&P's talking about. Was there an actuarial report done for lifetime health care? Anybody know? Ed, could you check on that? Lifetime health care, was there an actuarial report done? I mean, we're paying all this money, and nobody can answer, not you, it's not directed at you, but that should be a document that everyone on this council should be reviewing. We went into prescription drugs, and I guess the last thing was, right now we're paying $10.5 million for retiree health care, and it's $600,000 on the city side. On the school side. What I always say is we don't have to go to Stockton, California to make a comparison. All we got to do is walk up the street to our sisters over and brothers over at the school department and say, that's what you're paying. Shouldn't that be what we're paying on the city side? I mean, it only makes sense. By the way, are we still paying lifetime health care for 20-hour a week employees? Is that still relevant? I mean, can you believe that? I know we did in the past. We paid lifetime health care for people working 20 hours a week part-time. By the way, you could start collecting. It used to be at 54. I think it's now 59. This gets back to what former Councilman Cushman just said. Nobody knows. This should be that's a discussion for the Warwick Fiscal Overlook Committee that I just suggested to you. This is where we should be discussing. As much as I want to talk about tires and public safety, in all due respect, Councilman Sinapi, that's not solving our problems. We could write checks to people who come in and give them $500. Don't take our time. We should be addressing this issue. So anyhow, it's getting late. Appreciate your time. Let me just make one comment, one question. Let me leave with a question, because I could be here another 3 hours, but I'm not going to waste your time. Here's my question for you. Who is going to have the intestinal fortitude on this council to have a realistic discussion with the city employees? And this is the question. Explain to the taxpayers how we can pay you private industry wages and public employee benefits. Can't do it anymore. We cannot pay private industry wages and public employee benefits. And somebody, because start talking to the taxpayers, because we're the ones paying for it, and we need an answer to that question. Thank you very much, and I will not be back in 13 years, I promise.
Thank you. Does anybody else like to speak? Yes.
My name is Michael Pelissari.
You could just talk into the mic so we could hear you.
My name is Michael Pelissabrin. I've heard a lot of things tonight. I could go in long discussions. Councilman Morello, we've had it, and a few others have had long conversations over the last week over an issue. The bottom line is, now you had said something, and I don't know who you are because I can't see you because I'm blind. But I can tell you one thing, even a blind man can see that this is bad. You were saying how people can afford the debt, and they can't afford it. We have debt. I have debt. We all have debt. You know what you do in the real world? Your wife or your husband, you go out, you get an extra job. You find something where you make extra funds. We are in the 21st century, and we're having a 19th to 20th century conversation. We can fix this. You need to run the city like a business. I don't want to go over numbers. I want to know the numbers, but I don't want to sit in a council meeting and hear all numbers. I want to hear what the plan is. What are you going to do? I heard the 5-year, but I want to know, what is your plan? You're all residents as well. You're all affected by what goes in the city. Pay attention. Listen to what the people are saying. Numbers are great, but you know what? All the middle class, which is predominantly what's in Warwick, we shouldn't be in this situation. They're all sitting there going, what's going on? What are you going to do? They don't want the numbers. They don't want long debates. What is your answer about fixing the community? And it's not just you. It's Mayor Solomon. And let me tell you something. I know about a complacent mayor who was in here for 19 years, and all I hear is about advertising this, and that, in the past. I don't care about the past. That's gone. It's done. We're buried. What are we doing for the future? What are we doing for the present? I don't care about the past administrations. You're the current administration. Now, I've talked to several of you, and you have a firm commitment in the community. You tell me things. You told me things that, what you felt, same things I felt. Do your job. Isn't it what Bill Belichick says? I don't want big debates. I want answers, and I want projections, and I want results. And we can get results. Past administrations be damned. Advertising did run the city down. We all know that. I don't need to keep hearing it. I want to see what you're going to do, and I absolutely want to see what Solomon's going to do. I'm going to tell you something honestly. I have no tact. I'm not going to sit here and tell you a bullshit story. I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't like Solomon. I want to see action. You can tell me all the things you want. All I hear is he blames advertising. Prove to me that you're committed to your community by fixing the community, because that's all we want. And the discussion I had with you, hold other companies and the airport accountable. The airport only pays $500,000 or around $600,000 a year. We send our fire and police apparatus, it costs us $1.5 million minimum. We're in the red already. That's not going into the future. Why should we be responsible for the airport? Why isn't the state kicking in? Everybody in the state uses the airport. Why are not all 39 communities supporting us, helping us? Why should we carry the burden for the airport? They've had expansions. They take thousands of homes. What have they given back to the community? These people need to be held accountable. They're part of the community. They need to pay for it. Again, we just do our jobs. You respect the city? You love the city? Then show the city. Stop giving me words and start giving me action. That's what we need. That's what we need for Solomon. That's what we need from you. And that's what we need from the school administration, which if I went down that road, we'd be here for hours. We've got negative national attention to an inept personality that's running it. We don't need this stuff. We're a great community. We have such potential. The airport, the train station, we have the hotels, we are the best community in the state. But what do we have to show? When people come flying into our airport, and what do they see? The roads aren't kept up, the school system's rated 23rd, 24th in the state. I'm embarrassed. I love this community. So don't give me big projections, don't give me big numbers. Just do it. We can do it. And that's all I've got to say, and I really do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that'd like to speak? Councilwoman Travis.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to make it known, because I heard a lot of remarks made, that I do not take health care from the city of Warwick. So I am not one of the lifetime health care going to be getting, okay? I also work 3 jobs. So I'm in the same categories of a lot of people out there that are worried about taxes. But unless we work together, and that was brought up many times, that everybody's got to be working together, it's not going to happen. Things are not going to move. It's been brought up many times. Some people had great ideas, we're going forward, and then some other people would not agree to it, or one person wanted it, some people didn't like it. Unless we work together, it's not going to happen. But don't think everything's peachy creamy just because some of us are all council people, because it's not. I work 3 jobs, I work hard, I have a sick husband, and it's not easy. It's not easy to run a household and pay the bills and have taxes going up. So don't think that we're out there to make the people, the taxpayers, pay for everything. We got a lot to do. We have the roads, we have the schools. I had a water break last night in my area, and the sewer issues are getting old. The pipes in my area are very old, and I know it's the same thing in all of the other wards. But unless we all work together, and that means everybody, it's not going to happen. So hopefully we all can work together. Thank you.
Councilman Lattiser.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we were asked a question earlier, and the question was, what's the first step? And the last gentleman who was just up here speaking, I think he hit the nail on the head. And the first step is respect. Respect each other. Respect the taxpayers. Respect the responsibility that we all have in this. Everyone has a right to their opinions. All the members of the public and the taxpayers, they have a right to come to that podium and give their opinions and recommendations and suggestions, et cetera, et cetera. So do the elected officials. I happen to respect the fact that 1 or 2 or 3 of my colleagues may have a different perspective on this problem that we have. We all know we have a problem. We might differ as to the extent of the problem, but we all know we have a problem. Nobody here is saying we don't. But everybody has a right to their opinion. And we are not going to fix anything unless we respect that right. The council folks who spoke tonight that maybe had a different opinion than I had, that doesn't mean they were wrong and that I was right, or vice versa. It means they had the courage to speak on this mic and give us a different spin as to how they perceive the issue. Maybe more significant than some, maybe not. But I think the answer to the question is, what's the first step? And the first step is to respect. Respect we have a problem. Respect everybody's right to give their perception as to what might be the better way to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Sinapi.
So this is for Kyle. Council President Marola had a question about, I honestly can't recall the exact specifics, but you said you needed the active plan members to be able to answer it. And I got the annual statement for the city of Warwick. We had 369 for the city as of July 1st, 2017, and 336 for the school department as of the same date for active plan members.
Do you have the retiree numbers as well?
So the inactive ones?
Yeah, correct.
So for inactive for the city was 379 and plus another 31, so a total of 779 for the city. And then for the school department, 146 plus another 25, a total of 507 for the school department.
So if the question was if the non-school employees were to go on Medicare at 65 like the school employees did, is that what the question was? What would that liability represent?
I think that's what we're trying to estimate, because it was a $352 million liability compared to a $50 million liability.
Right. Just based off of math, and I'm not an actuary, so this is just an estimate. It'd probably be somewhere between 50 and 100 million, just because there's slightly more actives and maybe 200 more inactive and retirees. So that's just a guess.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here to speak?
Except what a council person just stated in terms of, in order to get things done, we have to all work together. I mean, what is this all work together bit? You know, the council and yourself, everyone here, you are the leaders of this city. We have looked at these numbers, and these numbers they're staggering as to what they show. I mean, this is just extrapolating what's here into the present, and they show it's not, you want an easy course, and we still got a problem. You get any deviation from that course over the future, and we got really bad problems. But yet, you know, you look around at this council members, and I listened, I wasn't sure if I heard that, geez, yeah, we recognize that this city has got financial problems ahead of us. I don't get that from the people I hear. I got it from two council people that, yes, we have a problem. We had to address them. You know, I specifically heard it from Councilman Ladisor. You know, and he was the only one expressed any type of leadership that I heard coming out of you guys. He's the one who said, yeah, I think I have a plan. I'm going to go forward with it. Everyone else, nothing. You know, I heard people addressed or go into what the OPEB liability situation is, or what the debt situation is for a pension plan. But then really, when it comes down to these numbers, it doesn't matter. Because you've got to address the expenditures coming forward. The liabilities will address themselves if you address the expenditures. If you look at what is considered to be a reasonable employee benefit plan or health plan, and you go and you recognize that and you implement it, that OPEB liability is going down. It's just a natural thing. It'll happen. Don't isolate just on that liability. Look at this. Look at the expenditures and where you can attack them. But I didn't get that. I didn't get that from out of the council. I got it from, like I said, one person, Councilman Lattisaw, and it's not all working together. You know, the people in this audience are not going to work together to get this implemented. It's going to have to be you. And where is it coming from? Where is the intensity that says we're going to make changes in this city? I didn't hear it. And I didn't hear it from a kumbaya moment. That's absurd. There's no person in this audience who's going to make the changes. It's up to you guys. And it's up to you guys to grab the ball, you know, and move forward. Sure, you're going to get pushback. But you always got to get pushback. I was talking to one of the councilmen before this meeting. And there was, at one point, the gentleman came up here, he said the teachers are, you know, they're basically, they follow. But the teachers in this city, I can remember when they were out stoning the mayor's office when he tried to make changes. You know, it was prior to Aberdeen. Aberdeen didn't make any changes, and I think people pointed it out. A lot of this goes back to Aberdeen. But there was teachers out there that were stoning the mayor's office. Nothing for the last 18 years, and we know why. We know the problems we're into. And this was because of people who weren't paying attention. And there were some people on this council who weren't paying attention because they let a lot of things slide and they want to go along with the mayor. But what we need is leadership, and we're looking forward to you guys to do it. Councilman Marola, Councilman Lattisaw, you have spoken up. In the past, move forward with it. Make changes. That's what people expect. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Mike Underwood, Ward 4. I'm going to give a little background information about myself first. I grew up in Warwick. I went to John Brown. I went to Aldrich, and I went to Pilgrim. 2 of those schools are closed now. The sports fields used to be great in this city. I graduated Pilgrim. I went in the Coast Guard, did 23 years of honorable service. I'm also a disabled vet. At no point in my career is my retirement benefit going to be more than I was making when I was actually working. At no point. And from what I understand from Mr. Cushman's reports, we're looking at astronomical $1 million retirements. I'm not getting that. And I put my life on the line in the Coast Guard. Not only was I a fireman, I was also a police officer on the water. So I did 2 of those jobs. I don't get extra money. Actually, I was supposed to get extra money, but because I'm disabled, I don't. Not at all. I put my life on the line for the North Cape Scandia tug and barge rescue. 30-foot seas, 80-mile-an-hour winds, and I went out and saved those people on that boat without a thought to my own safety. I'm never going to make more than I did when I was actually working. I don't get free health care for life. Not at all. In fact, the only thing I do get free is for myself, because I did over 20 years. I can go to the VA. I'm married. I have to pay for a family plan. It's not unbearable, but I still have to pay for it. And when I hit 65, I go on Medicare like everyone else. I can still keep using the VA, but my family can't. I'm not going to throw numbers around like everyone else has. We've all heard it. I was watching this on live stream driving here. I work 2 jobs still, even though I collect a retirement and a small disability, because I can't make it in this city. I came back here when I retired because I was proud to come home. I can't make it in this city. My house has been for sale since May. I've had 3 people in the door. No one wants to come here. People are knocking down buildings. Drive around town. Would you rather pay tax on a building and a lot? No. Knock the building down. Now you're only paying taxes on the lot. This is the direction we're going. My job in the Coast Guard was a bosun mate. We fix things. We take charge. We run the show. I ran for state rep twice because I saw this coming, and one of our own previous town council members put in that stupid piece of legislation called the Evergreen. If you want to get around that, I think I saw everyone kind of talking that they recognize the problem. You're going to have to do what some of these people have said and realize the fact that we're in a financial crisis. You need to fix this. As a bosun mate, my last 2 jobs, I got put into a position because the guy before me was inept. He got relieved for cause. I don't care how we got here. We know the problems. We all know the problems now. We saw the numbers. You even said 3% of 0 is 0. 500 million, that's $500 million. And then to find out it was 700 million off tonight from 2 weeks ago, that's even worse. Fix the problem. You know the problem, fix it. I hope you all ran for the positions you were elected for so you could do good by the city. Here is your golden opportunity to take it by the reins and fix it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here to speak? If not, could I have a motion to close the public hearing? A motion by Councilman Lattiser, seconded by Councilwoman Travis. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Public hearing stands closed. If we could have a motion to adjourn. We'll put a, yeah. Second, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Council meeting stands adjourned.